Alright guys, gals, non-binary pals, welcome back to another talkie video. My last one with my Sega Saturn collection went pretty well, so I'm going to do a fun one today. I'm trying to think of different ideas, fun videos. And what else came up but a top 5 video, the low-hanging fruit. First one on the channel. And I love the Sega Saturn, you know that, but that doesn't mean all the games are perfect. So today, I wanted to do a list of my top 5 most overrated Saturn games. Overrated. And I do want to be super clear here that I typically don't like content creators who are only produce negative videos, bashing stuff, bringing stuff down and stuff like that. But this is a fun video for me. And the big thing to remember is this is my list, my personal list. Your list is different. If you do have a different list, let me know in the comments below. If you had fun with this list, let me know that too. If you think I'm crazy, if you think I'm off my rocker, let me know that too. But in a good, nice, and polite way. I built up so much goodwill from my last video. Let's crash it all down today. Number 5. The first game I chose for the list is definitely a fan favorite. I liked it at one point. I still do like it, but I don't think it's as good as many people give it credit for. And that game is Astal. Astal was one of the really early Sega Saturn games, and it does a lot of things right, meaning the graphical style and everything. It actually is really good. It's got huge sprites on the screen. There's a lot of, cool graphical effects. And a lot of people consider it sort of like this 2D grandiose masterpiece. But I feel that the gameplay is very, very boring. And the graphics, although good, are very early in the lifespan. They're not very polished. It's extremely slow-paced. It's very limited with any sort of actions or anything. You really can only do 2 things, hit and jump. You have the little bird that helps you, that can grab stuff. But I definitely feel it needed something in the gameplay department to bump it up to the level of the graphics, which are, like I said earlier, they're good. They're not perfect, And I definitely think people that think this is like some grandiose 2D masterpiece, it's not. It's not that. It's not that good. And that could be controversial. I understand that. It's just my opinion. Astal it was a good game for the time, right? Doesn't hold up quite so good, mainly in the gameplay department. And there's definitely even at the time, there's definitely other 2D experiences that were, better than it at the time that, aged even better going on to today. It did have some cool bosses in it. Most of the regular enemies were pretty darn boring. And like I said, the gameplay is so boring. There's not a lot of variation in the levels. Obviously they look different, but the gameplay doesn't change up very much. And I don't know, overall I just think it's kind of boring. Number 4. Okay, I'm gonna do it. Huge Sega Saturn fan, favorite system of all time. However, Castlevania Symphony of the Night, Sega Saturn version, is by far the inferior version. And it's definitely overrated. The Castlevania Symphony of the Night is one of the greatest games of all time, period, end of story. Metroidvanias, obviously, it's probably is my favorite Metroidvania of all time. It's easily my favorite Castlevania game of all time. And the Saturn version is kind of weird, because the Saturn is the superior sort of 2D system than the PlayStation. The big difference between the two is, the PlayStation had better 3D tools in it. Well, the Saturn had better sort of 2D tools in it. That's why you see a lot of, people reminiscing about the Saturn. It's the 2D half of the Saturn they sort of reminisce about because it was so awesome. And so you would think naturally in your head, hey, 2D game like Castlevania Symphony of the Night, that's going to be way better on the Saturn. Way better. But it wasn't. It came out after the PlayStation version. It was not optimized. You could tell Konami did not put a lot of time and effort and care into it. And the big selling point behind it is it did have a couple new areas with some new enemies. However, and some new items too. However, if you play it, the new areas and the new enemies are laughably bad. Like, some of the new areas is just a hallway. It's just a hallway. It's like 3 levels with, surrounded by enemies that you've seen 100 times in other areas. No new enemies. And then there's, a couple other areas with new enemies. And when you go to these new areas and look at the sprites of the new enemies, you can tell they had some underpaid intern doing those sprites that day. It's got way worse load times. Even the map takes a while to load, which is probably the most egregious, annoying thing about it. The new areas, like I said, are super uninspired, super boring. And performance-wise, is probably the biggest thing. There's a lot of slowdown, even with the very first enemy you meet in the game, the very first wolf enemy after the intro scene. Like, the screen slows down to a crawl just hitting this one enemy. And if you do get by that stuff, obviously Castlevania Symphony of the Night, like I said, is one of the greatest games of all time. And the flaws in the Saturn version don't destroy the experience in the game. So if this is the one you have, then by all means play it, because the game is just that good. But to actually think that the Saturn version is superior to the PlayStation version has got next to no slowdown. It's got the transparencies. It's got way better graphical effects on a lot of the things. Shorter load times. You can instantly bring up the map. Like, I'm a Saturn fan. I'm with you. But the Castlevania Symphony of the Night on the Saturn is definitely overrated. Like, it's very expensive to get the import because people want it. Because, they think, hey, it's a superior version. It's got new stuff in it. But at the end of the day, I don't feel that way. Easily the PlayStation version is the superior one, and it's a good experience still, even with the flaws, but it doesn't even hold a candle to the PlayStation one. Number 3. Alright, number 3 on my list is a working designs game. I love working designs. I love almost all the working designs games. I've said that before. However, there was one rotten apple in the bunch that they should have never brought to America. And that's Shining Wisdom. Yes, Shining Wisdom, the game where you eternally have to mash the B button just to run. Literally, the first tutorial in the game is how to run. And how to run is to keep pressing the B button like this. So as you're adventuring and going around, you're just constantly hitting the B button like this. And if you release the B button, your person starts to move like molasses. So if you stop and to hit an enemy with that extremely short sword, then you gotta start speeding up again to run around again. It's one of the worst mechanics in any game like this ever. I've never been a huge fan of sort of the graphical style of the Shining games. Like, Shining Wisdom, Shining the Holy Ark, Shining Force. They have, they all feature, the fairies and stuff at the beginning and like an old man telling a story and stuff like that. I've never been a super big fan of those. Obviously I like Shining games. Shining in the Holy Ark is eons better than this poop stain of a game. And they tried to take that graphical style and make like a Zelda game out of it, and it doesn't work at all. The rotoscoped graphics with the thick black outline on the graphics, it looks extremely poor even for the time. The weapon and equipment system is just a mess. You can only equip one thing at a time, and there's some weapons and stuff like speed boots and stuff, like you're running, but then there's an enemy in front of you and you need to jump, and there's jump boots that you have to put on to jump, but there's an enemy in front of you, so you gotta put on the sword to hit the enemy. So you're pausing it to change all these weapons one at a time, all the time, in addition to mashing that B button still. And it just doesn't make sense how it was designed like this. And even when you get your sword in the game, it feels almost like an early Ys games. In the early Ys games, you had to you didn't swing your sword, you walked into the enemy to hit them, sort of. And literally, when you swing your sword in this game, the range is like a pixel. No joke, it's like a pixel. It feels so off because enemies almost always hit you before you hit them, because you have to get so close to them to hit them. And it almost feels like that Ys game. It almost doesn't feel like you're swinging your sword at all. It just doesn't make sense. And I think a lot of the goodwill from this game is based on just being a working designs game. Yes, it has that cool foil cover. It's got the cool packaging and everything. The normal working design's fair. But I played this game once or twice back in the day. I don't remember where I played it, or if I owned it or borrowed it or rented it or whatever. But I was just like completely off of this like right away. It was just not the game for me. I'm gonna play it someday. I'm gonna subject myself to it someday, the full thing on the channel. But to me, based on that criteria, I definitely think it's an overrated game because it is expensive, and you know, I have heard some people like it. That's okay. If you like things that I don't like, it's all good. This is for fun. This is my list, okay? Number 2. There are absolutely zero redeeming qualities of this game. It probably should be number 1, but number 1 is a fun one. Anyways, there's 0 redeeming qualities to this game. And number 2 on my list is going to be Mysteria, Realms of Lore. I almost said the name wrong. I had to look. I remember when this game came out, people were comparing it to Shining Force 3 in a good light. Meaning, oh, it's as good as Shining Force 3. And I played this game one time. I could not believe anyone could even fathom this in the same planet as Shining Force 3. It's another game that used the rotoscope graphics. However, they're not even remotely good. There's like 2 frames of animation per second. Whether you're walking, whether you're in battles, whether you're just talking in the cinemas, the animation is so bad. And I've heard people say, hey, Mysteria, everything's bad in it, but the gameplay is good. It actually plays good, so it's a worthy game. And I would say it plays like a typical strategy game. Yes, all the pieces are there for the strategy game, but just the environments, the character graphics, the monsters, the voices, the music, everything is just so bargain basement and so poor in this game. So to me, the mediocre gameplay doesn't, you know, make up for all the other stuff that's wrong. And it's just one of the absolute ugliest games you'll play on the Saturn ever. There's so many better options than this for strategy games. Dragon Force, Iron Storm, Vandal Hearts, Shining Force 3, obviously. Obviously, I'm playing it again to get footage for this episode, and like it's absolute torture. Like, it really is torture. Like, nothing in this game is very good. And obviously, you know, real people made this game, so I'm sympathetic to that. And maybe they cut the development of the game short because of the Saturn sort of dying out at the time. I don't know. But it does have that super sort of unfinished, you know, sheen on it. Like, maybe, you know, it could have been more, but it just didn't have enough time. It didn't have enough quality controls in place. So it's definitely on the list because it does have praise for the gameplay. But I mean, to me, in my mind, that doesn't, you know, wash away the sins of the rest of the game. Number 1. Alright. Okay, number 1, very controversial. Number 1 will get me some hate. But it's okay, because we're different people, so I shouldn't get hate, technically. But, so hear me out, because I know this is gonna be a weird one, okay? So my number 1 most overrated game for the Sega Saturn is Burning Rangers. Burning Rangers is an awesome, visionary game, and I think the problem with Burning Rangers is it was too visionary. It was too future-facing, and the technology did not match what they were trying to do with Burning Rangers. Burning Rangers, to me, should almost have been canceled, because it was one of the later Saturn games. It was one of the last releases, right? They should almost have been canceled and then made as a Dreamcast version later, much like Nintendo sort of does now, right? With Breath of the Wild. Remember, Breath of the Wild was on the Wii U, and they sort of made it for the Switch. But maybe they should have done that with Burning Rangers, because Burning Rangers on concept level is absolutely amazing. It's one of the games that I played that I'd never played anything like that before. But I don't think the Saturn was ready to do what Yuji Naka sort of envisioned when they were doing Burning Rangers. The controls are very messy. The graphics, there's a lot of graphical issues. As beautiful as the game is, there's just as much graphical issues too. There's a lot of pop-in, there's texture warping all over the place, there's frame rate issues, And the muddy sort of graphic fidelity of it, especially on an old CRT, made it so hard to see some things, to see where you were going. It was super hard to navigate because you didn't have the map. You actually took audio cues for where you're going. There was a button you could press, I think it was Z, and you'd be like, hey, which way am I going? And she'd be like, go forward, go left, go right, go up. And I think with more modern technology, they probably could have done that a little bit better. It was different. Again, it was visionary for the future. Like, there's so much stuff Burning Rangers does really good, but that doesn't change it in my mind for being a little bit overrated. And like I said, I don't fault Sega. I don't fault the programmers or anything like that. I think they did the best job they could. I think maybe the Saturn couldn't deliver what they wanted to deliver. I sort of compare it to Shenmue. It originally started on the Saturn, and the Saturn maybe couldn't do exactly what they wanted to do. So then they ported it to the Dreamcast, right? I think maybe they should have done the same with Burning Rangers. The camera and the overall controls were very floaty. The camera wasn't that great. You couldn't freely move it. You could only, knock it side to side a little bit. If you could freely move it in some way, it would be much better. There's super bad collision detection. There's super bad jumping in it. There's super bad glitches in it. I've had a couple glitches along the way too. And it could have been like Mysteria. Again, this came out at the very tail end of the Saturn's lifespan, so maybe the development time wasn't what they wanted in it. And they just had to release something. And my biggest complaint in it was, again, it was a little too ahead of its time with the verticality in the levels, if that makes sense. Most of the levels weren't just straight forward and backwards, they were up. But the way the camera was and the way the controls were, like, it was super hard to actually see where you need to go. Like, jump up. You're doing a lot of blind jumps in the game, and there's, little things like that definitely added up to not the greatest experience in the world for me. So I definitely understand the fans of this game. Most of the fans of this game are just fans of Yuji Naka and like everything he does. But I don't know. I do think it's flawed. It was too ahead of its time. Saturn couldn't do really what the vision was for it, and the game definitely suffered because of it. All right, that's my list, my personal list. That's 5 overrated Sega Saturn games. I do like some of them. This list is a little bit of fun, but a little serious too. So whether you agree or not, let me know down below. Guys, gals, non-binary pals, make sure you check out shop.enemyzero.com for merch. And thank you for watching.